Arthur.
Hi. We are live. And we are
yes,
connecting.
Yes, I am alive. Yes.
You are alive, and we are live on the internet too.
Wonderful.
Happy birthday. Happy birthday, Red.
So
Oh,
Thank
it's your birthday. Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Yesterday.
Okay. We are virtually connecting from Bishkek, the Amical conference in Kyrgyzstan right now. I'm Mahabeli from the American University in Cairo in Egypt, and we have with us on site, Nadine, could you all introduce yourselves, please?
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Nadine Abulmagd. I'm from the American University in Cairo as well at the Center for Learning and Teaching. We're here in Amical, and I have Gina and John.
Okay, sorry. So I'm John Traxler from the University of Wolverhampton in the UK, and I'm here as one of the two keynote speakers.
And I'm Gina Seizing, and I've just learned from John that my institution should properly be pronounced Bryn Mawr College, but we call it Bryn Mawr College in the United States in Philadelphia, and I'm the other keynote speaker here at Amical.
Yes, and both of your keynotes have been recorded, and anybody can watch them. The links are inside the Virtually Connecting blog post. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask the folks who are joining us virtually to say who they are, where they're from is right now. So Arthur, is it okay if you start? Just tell us where you are and where you're from and what time it is. Oh, you need to unmute, sorry. It's at the top, in the middle, somewhere in the top, to unmute yourself. Can you find it? Yeah.
Hi, I'm Arthur Smith. I was formerly with OCLC, a founding member of Amical, and thank you very much for inviting me.
What time is it where you are?
3:45 in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for joining, Arthur. We're so happy to have you.
It's my pleasure. It's wonderful to see everyone.
Hey everyone, my name is Autumn Keynes, and I'm coming to you from Green Bay, Wisconsin. I'm an instructional designer at St. Norbert College, and it is 2:48 a.m. here.
Woo! Cheers.
Hey everyone, I'm Christian. I'm coming to you from Hamburg, and I'm not going to complain that it's 9:48 on a Sunday morning.
Hi, Christian.
So then I should also not complain that it's 9:45, 9:48 around here. I'm Ivana Stevanovic from American University in Kosovo. I'm a librarian here, involved in information literacy as well as digital literacy that Amical and my institution are trying to undertake.
Hi everyone. So it's almost 11 here. I'm from AUB, from Beirut, and I've been a member with Amical since 5 or 6 years, and I'm an instructional designer.
Hi, Ryan.
Hey.
Hi everyone. It's a pleasant 5:20 p.m. Sunday afternoon in Central Australia. I'm a learning technologist, Wendy Talion speaking, and I currently work at Charles Darwin University.
Thank you, everyone. I realized maybe I'm the only one who's not on a weekend, because Sunday is not weekend in Egypt. So this is like a totally normal day for me. And yeah, 9:50 a.m. as well. So tell us, how's the conference been? I've watched both of your keynotes, enjoyed both of them, and both of them raised some questions for me. But I want to hear from you guys about how your conference experience has been so far. And then I'll ask virtual folks to see if you have any questions.
Well, this is my first Amical, and it's incredible. What an amazing community. And I think another community that I hope we're stitching together is we have many sort of US-based cohorts like this that are faculty and instructional designers and librarians, and we gather across the US, but why not more internationally? So I hope we will continue to connect, but it's been just amazing.
Yeah, I've been confused and informed by learning about what on the one hand I guess is a fairly American way of looking at education, and at the same time in an international context. So although I work internationally, it seems to be a kind of parallel or orthogonal universe. And so I guess part of what I've been doing is just kind of sucking up all this information about how things work in, like I say, we're all academics, but we're not all the same academics. So it's quite kind of informative and entertaining and good fun in that respect.
Mm-hmm. How was your conference?
Yeah, well, so far things have been pretty busy. I'm one of the lead volunteers for organizing this conference. So ever since I got here, I've been, running around like trying to get people to their appropriate sessions and stuff. But people have been really nice, and the hallway conversations are actually super exciting. We've had a lot of conversations after John's keynote yesterday. He was talking about being critical with digital literacies. And today we had some hallway conversations, not so much yet, because right after that we had another session about frameworks for Centers for Learning and Teaching that Huda, the director of our center, was giving. So it's been pretty interesting. I can see digital literacy as being a huge theme. This year, it's like the conference has digital literacies all over it, basically. Like the two keynotes. A lot of these sessions tomorrow, we have a Birds of a Feather conversation with Jeff.
I think we're going to do an unconference session today also.
Oh, and also about digital literacy, right? So it's all over. And the reason that is because it's an Amical consortial goal. And like this term is basically developing digital literacies at institutions. It's one of their strategies or their goals. So I think people are really, really diving into that pretty deeply, and it's interesting.
How did you find the campus there? They told me that it's really interesting.
It is
amazing. It's really interesting. And the funny thing is, do you want to tell them about the
so Henry Meyerberg, who is the architect for the AUCA here, he in 1986 through 1997, with some breaks along the way, he designed our Carpenter Library at Bryn Mawr College in Philadelphia. And he's here, so I've gotten to meet him for the first time. But the building is incredible.
It's amazing. They have everything in one building. Like the whole campus is in one building. I'm going to send you guys photos later on.
Yeah,
it's just.
And then outside, there's a view of the mountains, which is just spectacular when it's not cloudy. And they have designed a space where a yurt can be erected, and they erected a yurt for us yesterday.
A yurt is like a tent type of thing that the nomads from the original Kyrgyz people used to build them and live in them. And they actually still do. Like you can find these in the villages everywhere. And they demonstrated live yesterday. It was such an amazing cultural experience.
And I saw also a lot of music experience as well.
Yes.
So who was the first?
The really cool thing about this campus is that it allows for so much collaboration and interaction between the students, the faculty, and the staff, and everybody. It's also because it's pretty open. So you have like this this big building that is hollow in the middle, and at the bottom of that there is the large auditorium. And throughout the whole building, there are rails, and it's open, so you can see always across the building from wherever you are. So kind of like a panopticon, but in a
good way.
In a good way. Yes. Some places are a bit hidden away and stuff, but I found that's and he designed it, right? I had a conversation with him the other day, and he said he designed it so that there's a lot of interaction and there's a lot of collaboration with the students and the entire community. And I think that worked because Angie was talking about it. And she said they did this research about when they designed this space. We had a panel also yesterday about learning spaces in terms of libraries and redesigning learning spaces for better learning. And she talked to the students and she asked them about whether or not this actually worked and they feel like they're part of a community, and all the students pretty much agreed.
Right? And he has a particular mission around density as opposed to sparsity.
Yes,
wanting to keep students close together rather than use sparsity as some kind of metric of excellence, rather than saying how far apart everyone is. He says how close together everyone is. I kind of worry that this legitimizes overcrowding, but
it could.
This is kind of music to the accountant's ears.
But that's really interesting, because our campus is the opposite of that. I think it's become the opposite of that, where it's like a long campus, and I think it's quite dispersed in that sense. if it was more round, then it would be easier for people to keep meeting each other, but it isn't. So
and can I notice one more thing, Maha, exactly about AUC? It could also be that maybe, as opposed to what was the name of the architect? I met him, I just forgot his name. He was mentioning, the one who designed AUCA. He actually engaged in many communications with the staff, students, and basically the whole local community. So even the buildings were kind of clustered to make it possible for people to meet up. For example, one thing that you see in the new AUC campus is that some departments or some buildings are too far away from each other, which makes it really complicated to get that kind of natural flow and communication going on. So, yeah. But I really loved what his plan for AUCA was. And speaking about these open plan and many spaces where basically community meets, and especially about the library, we had fantastic workshop with him back in Athens at the conference. And it's interesting how it depends on context. For example, my faculty have fought for 2 years to get their private offices because at the start they had them like jointly. Same goes for the library. They want more private space, to say so. But as we were explained for AUCA, that sense of community and being able even like to sit on the floors a lot, being able to, in the library, for example, being able to have that sense of space is kind of almost encoded still in the daily lifestyle that most of the Kyrgyz students would have. Yeah.
So are you saying that how one builds an academic space is culturally specific, and that students coming from a Kyrgyz background would have different expectations how space is used, about the relationship between privacy and public spaces, for example, would be different from, I don't know, British students or South African students or Australians. They come from different backgrounds in terms of their use of space. And so there isn't a one-size-fits-all architecture.
Ivana froze.
That makes a lot of sense. And Christiane was writing in the chat that we sometimes look at intentional design as design, but when we don't like something, that's still designed by someone. If it feels invasive or whatever, it's still either either that person did that on purpose or they overlooked something important. That's why it's important what Ivana was saying about architects speaking to the users, and and Autumn is talking about oppressive designs. Anybody want to say anything about this out loud?
I just wanted to make a comment about the yurts and the circular design, because on our campus they intentionally built a what they call a yarning circle. So it's a fire pit with a circular seating space around it, but it doesn't bring the campus together, and I rarely see it used. So it's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
I actually really like the topic of the keynote. I'm just wondering who had a chance to watch any of the keynotes from today or yesterday. So that's Maha, Ryan. Okay, great. Maybe we can like give a quick and Arthur as well. Great. Yes, Arthur, we saw you. We also saw you watching us. So we wanna. Do you wanna give a quick synopsis, like a very short brief, and maybe like folks virtual could like give us a.
Okay, I think I was probably saying if I was saying probably in a short paragraph that the idea of digital literacy, I think, has a particular cultural background or heritage that maybe has been servicing, I don't know, a particular agenda around employment within Western European economies, and is still contaminated, if you like, with a kind of legacy of courses that taught IT skills, for example. And even in its own terms, I think that's probably inadequate. I mean, if for no other reason that we're heading for an era not of full employment, but very, very partial employment, and we need to look at how people can flourish and prosper beyond and outside their economic existence. But then if you look outside that purely self-referential European context, then I think different types of community need their own enactment of digital literacy in order to recognize the tensions often between their own language, culture, traditions, as against the global or largely American technologies and academic traditions and epistemologies and so on, to be able to kind of make critical choices about the extent to which they want to preserve their own language, traditions, epistemology, pedagogy, way of doing things, and recognizing that they also probably want to engage economically with the global information superhighway and the knowledge economy, and so on and so on. And that actually has an enormous lot of ramifications. And when I'm saying that, I suppose I'm not just making a kind of northern versus south kind of argument, or developed world versus developing world kind of argument, or mainstream communities versus marginal, fragile and nomadic communities kind of argument, but also saying that our own students in the developing world are probably caught between similar tensions of maybe their working class backgrounds entering a middle class academic background and needing to, I don't know, renegotiate their various and fluid digital identities, and to recognize how the norms of both social interaction are changed by the presence of digital technology, and how also the digital world itself represents its own culture and environment, and how they have to learn to navigate both of those changed and permeable worlds. How's that?
That was
fun. I really liked John's critique of a lot of I liked some of John's critiques of how a lot of the digital literacy models
start again. She was shaking my head.
I liked how you critiqued how the digital literacy models were all very individualistic.
Well, that's because individualism, or the lack of it, is culturally specific, and maybe my American friends are kind of way off the scale in terms of individualism, and but maybe not. Whereas my Chinese students are at the other end, and the British kind of just dither in the middle, really incisively. Which would be nice to everyone.
Yeah, but you were still referring to Beetham's model, and that specifically that was the one you were looking at and saying and Helen is British as well. So it was the JISC model. And so what about Gina?
Well, and that's part of the kind of backstory, if you like, that JISC was a large publicly funded organisation that served students. It's now been privatised in the bonfire of the Quangos when we moved from the centre left to the centre right, and now is servicing universities, not supporting students, I would argue.
I didn't know that origin story to JISC.
Oh, right, yeah. And therefore, a lot of what they're doing is supporting the idea of putting students into the economy. And you have to see anything they promote or produce within that context. And they're also responsible for the digital residents, digital visitors thing indirectly, of funding and promoting some of the research around that. But you could argue again that's largely individualistic. And that's probably a characteristic of our society and how they see jobs and employment.
So I'll summarize quickly what I did in the presentation, but then I want to respond a little bit to John's analysis, because it's good food for thought for me, but it's also complex in our environment. So what I did was I described the digital competency framework and program that we built at Bryn Mawr and that we're still developing. And the real secret sauce for us is that we made the case to faculty that this is not a new curricular requirement or a new labor that faculty need to do, but that in fact this is happening already, both in curricular contexts across programs, and just needs a language to help sort of bring to the forefront ways that students are learning, but also that it's happening throughout co-curricular experiences that students have, and that we can help scaffold for them sort of reflection on what it means to be learning in different contexts and what their own goals and drivers are that cause them to want to gain proficiency in different areas. And then sort of an invitation to others to think about what ingredients are in place in their own context, to imagine what kinds of models might work and what kinds of collaborations might be fruitful in building similar programs. So I wanted to think though, so in some ways, we do have a kind of individualistic message, which is that there is nothing in our program that all students must do, that each student chooses her own pathway through this terrain of digital fluency, which is to say, here's a sort of menu of opportunity, and if I were interested in particularly issues of privacy and security and those kinds of things, I might delve deeply into competencies and experiences that are relevant there. If I were interested in becoming a little bit more of a generalist, aware of different issues related to data, technology, social relations around those, I might do a more varied thing. If I were interested in data analysis and management and preservation and curation and presentation, I might delve in that way. And so there is a bit of an individualized model of choose your own adventure. However, I think we're in an environment at Bryn Mawr that is very much about how do we live together in an intentional community. So it's very much that the overall educational institution is framed as an experiment in, we have the first student self-governing program association of students in the country in the United States, and it's taken very seriously. So the students develop their own policies and their own ideas about how they live together and how they function. And they have quite an active role in a kind of shared governance model with faculty and administrators in terms of the academic program and how issues of honor and integrity are addressed within that model. So there is a kind of individual pathfinding, but it's within a context of an environment that is very much about how do we build our community together and how do we train for going out to be part of different communities in the world. So that's one facet that I think is interesting.
And I think I meant something that probably underpins or underlies what you're describing as individualized programs, because I mean, in any of those definitions of digital literacy, it is something about how to make the individual more digitally competent, or how to help them flourish, or whatever. But you know, if you then cut and paste community over that, you know, digital literacy is how to enable communities to become more digitally competent or flourish together, or whatever. And it's manifest, I mean, in that area, but in other areas I work where we look at research and we look at informed consent. Informed consent is very individualistic. And when I talk to Cree Indians, or whether I talk to people in Africa, it doesn't make very much sense except as a kind of imposition of Western practices. And so when I was working with a Cree Indian in Northern Canada, he was talking about, well, he couldn't just sign an informed consent form on his behalf. He needed to ask 3 generations sideways and think on behalf of his children and his children's children, and the implications
that this
for
is
that.
The people making a decision, not
but I mean, I don't particularly want to highlight the spectrum between communalism and individualism at the expense of any of the others, because you mentioned the relationships between staff and students, and that might be also a reflection on your culture or anyone else's culture in terms of a spectrum between authoritarian and consensual. You know, and so some countries, and I'm sorry, and it's not just countries, or countries is only one aspect of it, but some communities might be very flat, as it were, and how they would do things in Sweden would be very different from how they do things in Saudi Arabia in terms of the, well, you might call it the kind of power differential. Yes, and maybe how universities are organised is, to some extent, not only partly a reflection of their communities and their culture, but also of their aspirations. So they might be kind of authoritarian in their design, but communal in their aspirations. But having said that, I'm always struck by the fact that we talk about open learning and we talk about Web 2.0 as our kind of potentially our professional ethos. But then certainly I work in an institution which is very 1.0 closed and hierarchic in terms of management.
And conservative in maintaining itself.
You know, so as soon as you look inwards, we do not walk the talk. Forget it.
Speaking of open, I actually want to find out if if virtual folks want to ask us questions, because I think we're gonna have to maybe get going in a bit. So let us know if you guys are wondering things.
Well, I have a question just related to the LMS. And yesterday, you said that students, when they graduate, they don't use Moodle.
I didn't want to victimize Moodle.
No, it's not about Moodle. It's just the fact to have like an official system to manage the student learning at the university. And at AUB, we're really struggling with that. It's not about the tool itself, but to what type of support to give to the students, what type of official support. So I do believe that students, when they enter the university, they do need to be equipped with the different skills to be able to navigate through the tools and basically the digital stuff.
Yeah, well, sorry. I mean, I suppose looked at from one perspective, I worry about LMSs and a lot of other academic institutional software systems as not being particularly educational and actually about preserving the university's business model or keeping its IP, its academic communities behind a paywall. But if I was looking at it from an educational point of view, is it okay to say that? Sorry. This is Marxist critique. Sorry. This is what happens when they let me out of the country. But from a different point of view, our students are going into a world of kind of chaotic, polemic, digital abundance, and that's the very antithesis of what they'll meet inside WebCT or Blackboard. You know, where everything is kind of highly managed, highly controlled, where they can engage with some content, but only the stuff that's been put there, and they can engage with some people, but only the ones that have been put there. Okay, I mean, if you say that our students generally come from the school system, and the school systems have a duty of care, and we represent a kind of transition to adulthood, well, we also represent a transition to chaos. And therefore, you might argue that we should start with structure, but end with unstructure.
A different narrative about this that we talk a lot about in the IT world is that the higher education institutions used to be the place that people would come and they would have access to a fast network and tools that didn't exist out in the outside world and experimentation. And this was a technologically very vibrant space. And now what we do is we say, come to our place and leave behind the 21st century and use our 1980s structured, you know, platforms and stick yourself in there for 4 years and then go back to the world of riches, of openness.
Yeah, I mean, 10 years ago,
it is peculiar.
10 years ago, we were hearing kids talking about they go to school and they power down.
Right. It is,
and unfortunately, if this problematized, sorry.
More questions.
Yeah, I just wanted to get a chance to read a question or a comment that Christian had.
Let them say it. Let them say it out loud.
Why don't you go ahead, Christian?
Hi. So I just came back from Republica, one of the larger digital culture conferences in Berlin, and we had 2 virtually connecting sessions, and in one of them we discussed like the blunt question, what kind of digital literacy that it is, or that we want, and for what purpose that will actually be. And there was some kind of discussion and questioning around whether digital literacy shifts a locus of responsibility to the individual versus, or not even versus, while many of the questions that we should be asking or that we are currently asking around digital literacy can also be answered from a more regulatory perspective maybe, or an economical perspective, and so a more societal broader lens, if that's the right phrase. So I guess my question is, do you think that digital literacy tends to shift responsibility to individual users and students in a almost neoliberal kind of fashion? And I mean that more as a provocation than as a statement.
Yeah, so this is the same provocation in some ways that John is raising, I think, in that I would say it's both and in our context, right? So I think we very much want part of digital literacy to involve those reflective practices, those critical practices of thinking about how are we situated, right? What are the implications? What are the macro forces? What are the relationships, etc.? At the same time, it is certainly true. I won't say it's a pure thing, because we also, our higher ed system in the United States, at least, is really under siege in public discourse. There is tremendous disdain for any moment of intellectual inquiry, and there is not a value placed economically right now in our political arena on higher education. And so that public discourse is so strong that we also are having to make an argument not only about the value of the liberal arts and critical thinking and communication and ability to work with others, but also about the fact that our students' investment and their families' investment in their education will, quote, pay off, in that they will be able to find a pathway that allows them to sustain themselves and their communities and their families. So there is both the pragmatic, they need to be prepared to go out and tell plausible stories about what they're capable of doing in a digital era, but also a resistance to that by way of saying, along the way, please be thinking about these broader issues and giving them those frameworks.
Yes, it's just occurred to me that the kind of neoliberal environment for higher education in the UK rather inhibits education's capacity to make people feel uncomfortable. We can't make our customers feel uncomfortable, even if historically we used to get mad and make our students feel uncomfortable.
Correct.
Yes, the idea of shifting responsibility to our students for their digital literacy or the consequences of their digital illiteracy is probably compromised by their role as our fee-paying customers, and whether they want to take any responsibility, maybe.
I think Ivana wants to ask a question, unless I misunderstood.
Yeah, there was a question, and in a way our discussion has partly raised parts of what I'm also quite interested when talking about digital literacy. Again, what kind of individual responsibility we are talking about, because for sure, for me, that level of what I call meta literacy is very important, meaning that if you want it mediated or suggested by institution, in this case, educational system that someone has attended school, students are enabled to basically use their existing abilities to say so. And in that sense, my question was whether in today's context, so something that Gina mentioned, like what kind of public discourse public discourses we currently have surrounding digital literacy, can we even say that we understand what we mean by digital literacies in a very currently, as I see, quite plural understanding of it? Because I'm very interested more into something that we would rather call competencies. So these upper levels beyond skills, to say so. And yes, it was just my point towards the conversation and question in that direction.
Yeah, I'm just gonna say a very quick thing is, to me, the term competency implies that you achieve something and then you're done. And I kind of feel like
there you go.
Fantastic. Ongoing.
Fantastic. That's a fantastic point. However, then we go back also to people very often mentioning skill, which is also almost that level. You know, you learn to bake a cake, but then do you combine your knowledge to create something completely new? So is there that active learning component beyond it, and like reproduction in completely new and different environments? So like a completely individual curiosity and possibility to reuse what you were in a way trained on the skill level. So yeah, I agree. Maybe the competency is also not the proper term. Ability.
I think the connotations may be different in different local contexts. And for us, the conversation was about literacy sounded like a very bare minimum level of capability.
Yeah.
And as competencies are meant to be genres of exploration and lifelong learning, rather than some kind of rubric or checklist where you would ever gain complete mastery. And so the way we speak about it with students is that you could begin with just slight awareness of a realm, and then some practice and experience, and then it will take your life to delve deeply. And as you're delving deeply, these entire genres will evolve, and some will no longer exist and some new ones will exist. So I could see how competency, if you were rubber stamping students and giving them the badge, it could have that effect. But our model is very much about introducing a way of thinking about continuous learning over time.
And I suppose when I hear competencies, in a sense, I'm not sure what it might intrinsically mean, but I'm very conscious of what it extrinsically implies to my funders. And so if I was working in a kind of European Union context of funding, I kind of know that's one of the buttons I need to press, even if I think I can then kind of subsequently subvert it.
You would subvert it,
Yeah, so maybe if I hear that word, I'm being reminded to be kind of pragmatic and part of my principles.
Actually, what I pretty like about the competencies or the model that you guys are implementing at Bryn Mawr is that when you focus on the digital literacies in general, or the competencies, they don't just relate to the digital, it relates to the person or the personal or individual growth and development as a person, also away from that digital, right? It's like intersecting, right? It's what you do on the digital, what you do in your personal or face-to-face life that affects both of these models. Like I really like the idea that you sort of motivate or inspire students to become more confident. I really like that part where you focus on the students being able to articulate certain things and how to, talk about their experiences and their skills. And I don't want to say sell themselves, but this is really like something, market themselves, make their brand themselves.
I could be a member of your community.
Absolutely. And I feel like that is not like everywhere. I mean, a lot of the times you would find people, not just students, but like so many different age groups, they would say, oh, I don't know how to talk about my own experience. I don't know how to talk about my own self. I don't know how to talk about my strong suits. And I feel like a lot of the times right now, you need to tell people that kind of thing. And the way you would do that a lot of the times is through the digital world right now. But it's not always that way. So I really like how you focus on that side as well.
And for us, it really is a feminist project in that, as as someone who has seen a lot of hiring, men will typically look at the job description and say, oh, no problem, I can do 50% of that, I'm throwing my hat in the ring. And women will look at the resume and say, I'm missing 1 out of 99, qualifications. I can't possibly apply for that. And so this is just part of that intervention in saying, no, you've got this. You've got plenty of experience and you'll be able to adapt and learn in a new context.
And it's part of it, it's part of it to help students inhabit spaces which are appropriate to their personalities, physical or online spaces, and actually seek to work in those spaces whichever suit them, which might be saying, some type of people like working in open plan offices, some type of people like working in individual offices, some people like working in cyberspace.
I think yes, but also to be able to stretch and to know when it's worth the struggle to be in an uncomfortable, right? Like, and when it's worth going to a culture where it won't be very comfortable, but you're going to try to be the change agent. So
yes, admittedly, my argument looked kind of remedial.
But also we need to ask ourselves if the spaces are hospitable to certain people, and especially thinking about women. There are online and physical spaces that are particularly inhospitable to women, and what does that mean? And so in that sense, it goes beyond the agency of the individual, and then it becomes a communal responsibility if we want those spaces to be hospitable to others and welcoming to others.
Yes. Yep.
And in that context, I ought to kind of apologise for largely omitting gender in how I was discussing things yesterday.
That's okay. Gave us a complementarity. It's good.
Well, that's all right. And to be women to be women because it's complementary.
I just wanted to let everybody know that we're at the 2:25-minute mark. So what is going on right now in parallel are the community idea exchanges, and there are a lot of these. So I wanted to give these folks an opportunity to maybe visit some of these.
With the conversation here,
want.
so happy
If you
to
guys
stay.
want to stay on for a couple more minutes, it's up to you.
Yeah, I mean, if folks on site need to leave, that's fine. I'll be here for 15 more minutes or so if folks online want to keep talking.
Keep broadcasting, and then eventually.
No, I mean, we can stay online as well. Like, if you guys need to leave, you can go ahead and we can stay online and keep chatting live, and then I'll stop the broadcast when everyone wants.
We can stay 10 more minutes until maybe like 3:35, and then we'll head out, and you guys.
That kind of avoids it dying slowly.
I moved to show you all that what's behind us is this string art that someone made that is
You think maybe we
the
can get
building.
that closer?
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, I was really curious what that was.
You guys see?
Yes. Oh, the uni.
Yes.
That's the entrance or one of the sides of the university.
Yeah, that's
the
the
whole
front. That's the building. That is
Yeah.
what the building looks like.
Amical people are doing amazing job in informing those who are not participating on what's going on. So
I just thought for a second that you visited there before.
Ryan, have you been on Instagram, Facebook, or Twitter in the last 2 days?
Yes.
Have you seen the amount of information we got?
I know, that's amazing.
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah.
What other questions do you have?
I wanted to ask something. Nadine, did our group for digital literacy sanity, we are just calling it like that among the friends. Did you guys had chance to meet?
Yeah,
or not yet?
We're meeting tomorrow at 10:30 Bishkek time until 11:30 for the Birds of a Feather conversation me and Jeff are going to be doing. But I will email you and Maha and a couple of other people later on today, and I'm going to invite Gina and John to be a part of that if they have time or if they can. It's basically what this project is about, just very quickly, is because, like I said, Amical has the consortial goal of developing digital literacies across the institutions, the member institutions of Amical. So what we started doing in another Birds of a Feather conversation that was in a teaching and learning exchange program that we had at AUC.
In Cairo?
Where we started talking about digital literacies, and we noticed how there are very, very different definitions and that are very cultural and very contextual to these different institutions. So we started saying, well, we need to find out what people are defining it as and what's currently going on at these institutions first before we start suggesting or doing a strategy for improving digital literacies across these institutions.
Yeah,
that's the project. So we have like this survey that we would send to Amical institutions to just get the mapping of that information first.
Sorry, and I realise in some of the conversations, people have come up to me and then said, no, you're talking about media literacy or you're talking about information literacy.
So
and
different,
yeah, it would be silly to kind of start a definitions war or a kind of turf war about who exactly does what and what it means.
Let's agree, there are a lot of allied endeavors.
And we don't want to be saying, no, that's not.
This recent conversation we were having, Jeff suggested that actually a lot of people sometimes think that digital literacy is like the super literacy and inside it is info and media, but Jeff was saying, no, it's more like a Venn diagram with some intersections. So that there's some info and media literacy that isn't digital, of course. Of course there is. And then there are some that intersect.
Yeah, one of the colleagues today said to me, you helped me because I always thought of information literacy as the overarching and everything else within, but now I see that there are some connections and some Venn diagram relationships.
Well, you might argue that both media literacy and information literacy emphasize particular aspects or particular perspectives, and information literacy would worry me as being kind of at the expense of, I don't know, relationships or discussion, and media literacy might be talking about media as something things pass through, the mediums, as it were, again, at the expense of what those things are.
Yeah.
And sorry, that's a kind of, not a particularly sophisticated kind of rebuttal, but nevertheless, I'd have those concerns.
Yeah, so that's actually one of the important long shot goals that we had for what we are planning. So John and Gina, thank you for all your input tomorrow. I'm part of the group as well, just not physically present. So we do want to see all these complex relations and basically try to unify the understanding, if possible, for amical institutions. Of course, not per se only amical institutions, but that would be one of the arching goals in the context of what you just mentioned. Information literacy, media literacy, all these other terms. So yeah, let's see.
I could pose to you all a question that I don't know the answer to. So one of the folks at the conference today asked me this question. So she asked, do we have a rubric that explains what we're looking for at each level of competency for each of the types of digital competency? And I said, well, we really resisted that because we didn't want to give the impression that you could master in 4 years any of these things. And she said, rightly, but it's also a question of accessibility, and that if you don't ever articulate what you mean by it, some people will have a sense of what it means and some people will never have a sense of what it means. So I think there's a tension there, and I'd be curious what others think about this question.
Well, you can also, if you stay vague, you'll get a consensus. Too much precision is divisive.
Yeah, well, that was probably part of the strategy too. Is
or multiliteracy. Some people are saying about multiliteracy.
Yeah, maybe we'll tweet it out. Gina, we'll think about that question and tweet it out.
Okay, good. I appreciate that.
I suppose if I was fumbling...
To define or not to define, basically, or to be bigger.
Existential topics, Yeah, we are at that point, right?
We need to find a post-structural way of expressing.
You know that I'm
something.
all about post-structuralism.
And so to recognise the difference between, if you like, espoused definitions and enacted definitions.
Yes.
And we might espouse all sorts of high-minded things, and actually it turns out it's using Microsoft Office.
Right. Yeah.
Reminds me of a conversation that Maha and I had earlier at CLT, because some people were saying to know how digital literacies are happening at our institution, we need to know how faculty are using Blackboard. So Maha was like, that's not mainly what digital literacies is. Like, do you want to talk about that, Maha?
No, I was more like, nobody in the world defines digital literacy by how well you use the LMS. Like, you cannot make up that definition. But I was saying, basically, I think what Diane was sort of uncomfortable with, which is, yeah, digital literacy is not about how you use the LMS, because when you leave the institution, that's not what you do. And you need to develop the other literacies. But, honestly, the other thing to think about is that I used to work in Procter & Gamble, so that's a corporate entity, and you have this SAP, which is, again, the institutional platform, and so you don't need to conform to its processes and all of that. So it does happen, but I think conformity is not the thing that we need to teach our students. They're already used to that. I think it's all the other things that we need to build a literacy for. I don't think you need a literacy of conformity. Like in our society, especially here in Egypt, I mean, conformity is the norm. To some things, not to traffic laws.
There is a meta skill, though, that is about choosing your battles and accepting that some things are stodgy and annoying, but they're not worth arguing over. They just are how they are, and you can dig in somewhere else that's more meaningful. And the LMS is one of those things, I think.
Exactly. We're not particularly arguing for it or trying to change that, but maybe offering an alternative or maybe an expansion.
Many alternatives.
Exactly.
Yes.
So it's not particularly like, stop doing that. It's okay. It's
that if you like it, and for others, the world of other possibilities.
Exactly.
Yeah.
How are we doing?
There's a lot of stuff going on in the chat. I can't keep up with it anymore. Does anybody have any last questions or comments virtually?
I actually had a question to John's keynote yesterday, and he was talking about how a lot of these digital literacy models are modeled towards employment and getting students to be, to flourish in the employment world. But I'm curious, like, you're critical of that, so I'm curious, why do you think, or how do you think it would be to encompass like those students who are not planning on that employment world or employment path? Like, what would be the ideal alternative if you're critical of that?
Well,
you know what I mean?
Yes, I mean, I don't think I could be prescriptive, even if I was remotely knowledgeable. I suppose it's those definitions and enactments around employment skills are a reflection on our students as customers and where they see themselves as mostly wanting to go into jobs, getting more affluent, and how that also reflects the views and the priorities of other stakeholders around the university system, which might be the parents or employers or government or the local economy or whatever. And I think as soon as you start to have a conversation about what are the alternatives to employment, it gets very uncomfortable. It's not, you know, on the one hand, we hear
alternatives to capitalism is
yes,
what you're
possibly.
talking about.
Yeah.
Yes.
So on the one hand, we have a kind of recognition that I know the Internet of Things and artificial intelligence and performance support technologies and all the rest of it are increasingly doing things for us, but we haven't necessarily recognized that means we don't all have as many jobs as we used to, and therefore a model of education largely geared to servicing the economy is living in a kind of retrospective fantasy world.
I understand, but like maybe that model applies to the UK, but a lot of times, I don't know, Mahav, like disagree with me if you think that I'm going off track, but in a community like culturally, or in a culture or community like Egyptian culture, a lot of the like population is, you know, they have to work and they have to strive for that, and there's a very large unemployment rate, and even a lot of the students that graduate out of AUC and like the very, you know, top-notch higher ed and like high schools, even like they cannot really reach a part where they would, you know, be employed in a good job because of sometimes lack of or not proper digital literacies or otherwise, like there could be other reasons, but this is a community or a culture where we would want to have like a digital literacy sort of policy or strategy that helps them flourish in that world.
You're saying it's not, and so, yeah, so sorry, that last paragraph was probably a particularly UK higher education perspective, and I would recognise even for our students that come from the Asian community, it would not be a very helpful depiction of what we need to be doing for them from us.
To just add to what Nadine was saying, I think there's two aspects, right? There's the privilege of being able to go beyond employability, and you need to be privileged enough to say that. Right. But the other aspect of it is something Paulo Freire and Ira Shore say in A Pedagogy of Liberation, which is that you need to work on both the empowerment in terms of empowering the citizen or the community or the individual. That's one thing you need to do, but you can't really ignore the importance of teaching the dominant language, the dominant technologies, dominant skills that they need for employability, because they need economic survival, because nobody's going to, well, I guess some people do, but it's not usually easy to create like political change or that kind of thing if they're not able to survive economically as well to some minimum degree.
Yeah, I'm sure if there is an institutional and political will around a digital literacy curriculum that is not about the emphasis on employment, it shouldn't be beyond the wits of any of us within our particular cultures and communities, and might be looking at kind of creativity and expression, or might be looking at recreation and art, music, and lots of other artistic genres, how to both consume and create those, and might be about social action and about political action. I'm sure there's a whole spectrum of stuff, but not for any of us to describe or prescribe at a kind of academic and overarching level, but something bottom up from within communities.
It doesn't preclude being employed and contributing, but is also a whole life endeavor.
And I suppose there is a difference between employment and livelihoods in any case. That, for example, some people are outside the cash economy. Some whole countries are largely outside the cash economy. But often, I mean, if you look at many parts of Southern Africa and Eastern Africa and West Africa, they are incredibly well connected on mobile phones, and yet by and large not part of any of the cash economies. And so digital literacy must have some meaning, or it should have some meaning, and there should be something we can be doing for them, and completely ignoring this kind of jobs-ready graduate perspective.
Okay.
Is work changing though? I mean, I don't know if I can. I want to say that this is true, but I don't know on a global context if it's true. Like what I want to say is, I think there was a time when we could say that work was about, I make my widgets, I go into work every day, I have this lockstep process that I go through. I go home after my so many hours and I come back the next day. But it seems to me that there's a lot, those are the kind of jobs that are getting automated, right? Those are the kind of jobs that we're seeing technology kind of wipe out, and we're seeing a real need for that critical thinking, right? That it's not about just learning how to work one particular piece of technology or learning how to have one particular digital competency. It's about learning a bunch of different ones and being able to network those different skills together, being able to very quickly move between different skills.
Yes, right. I've just thought that if I was trying to describe the impact of digital technologies on any of the global economies, I think there would be three things that were kind of orthogonal. And one is the one I think you probably just described, about the extent to which computers are taking over progressively more and more of what we do as economic activities. Then there's the extent to which digital artifacts, commodities, resources form a progressively larger proportion of the economy. Things that were physical artifacts are now digital artifacts. The various commodities and transactions are increasingly digital. And then the nature of work itself is changing in the sense of how work is organized, and how there might be far greater oversight of people's work, supervision or surveillance, depending on how you want to look at it, far less independence. Classically, stories about people who repair photocopiers used to have kind of agency and autonomy and could go around from customer to customer to customer and would require expertise to do what it is they did. But nowadays they are now closely connected to their headquarters, who will track their itinerary, and they will be de-skilled because anything that needs repairing, the symptoms are fed back directly, the solution is fed back to them. So there is a change in the nature of how work is organized, as well as a change in what actually constitutes the transactions and the commodities which constitute the economy, plus the fact that computers are doing more of it anyway. And I think this is true, if you like, at a national level, for example, where you see nations have suddenly noticed that spectrum or bandwidth is a commodity. They can auction it. It's like discovering oil. And at an institutional level and at a private level, what's changing hands, metaphorically, is now digital and less analog or physical.
I thought the point that you made, John, in your talk about how Google's economy is the size of, I don't know if you said Pakistan's or Poland's.
It was Apple, but anyway.
Apple's, anyhow, that's this sort of new configuration of where the economic power lies and what it is that we're preparing folks to enter into.
And if you look at the amount of outsourcing, for example, and the number of firms where knowledge work is being done actually in India, for example, that changes the international balance of labour. And if you look at the fact that the world's first and largest mobile funds transfer, it started in Kenya, the global south, and actually it's one of the largest banking systems in the world, run by a telecoms company, not by a banking company. You can see all sorts of shifts and reconfigurations.
Okay,
it's time, huh?
I think it's time, right? We're gonna get going. So thank you guys so much for joining us.
Thank you. It's nice to meet you all virtually.
Yes, thank you so much. It's been such a great conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. So lovely to meet you. Hope we'll see each other again, or here at least.
Yes. Thank you. Bye.
Okay, I'm going to stop the broadcast. We can say our last goodbyes off the broadcast.
Air will take a